They think we're still learning to crawl. Let's make sure their last breath says otherwise. The command chamber jolted as another seismic tremor rolled through the permafrost beneath Arctic Command. The reinforced steel doors groaned under the pressure, not from attack, but from the polar crust itself reacting to the orbital jamming pulses rippling through the planet's ionosphere. Ice cracked against the outer walls like gunfire in a frozen cathedral. Somewhere below, a pipe hissed and burst. Commander Drenkors didn't flinch. He stood at the central console, surrounded by 12 men in thermal-grade uniforms, all eyes locked on the shifting readouts of Earth's last functional heads-up displays. Flickers of alien interference danced across the laser plasma interface like static-laced hallucinations. "Update," Kors demanded, his voice carrying the weight of every city losing power by the minute. "Global grid failure in progress," Major Lurik snapped, fingers dancing across the backup relay keyboard. "We've lost fusion relays in Osaka, Lyon, and Cape Town. Emergency batteries are holding, but life support prioritization has kicked in. Civilian sectors below latitude 20 are in blackout. No broadcast, no net." Kors turned slowly toward the northern display wall, where Earth's low orbit showed an unmistakable sight. Krath vessels. Hundreds, anchored in geometric arrogance. Their bioships weren't aligned like machines. They curled and expanded like breathing lungs, each glowing faintly with internal biolight and rhythmically pulsing to one another. The Dominion hadn't come to skirmish. They came to instruct. "Put their signal through," Kors said coldly. The chamber dimmed. The wall lit in a sickly green overlay as the Krath broadcast cut through human frequencies like a spear through cloth. A form appeared, reptilian yet fluid, draped in a flowing mesh that twitched like it breathed. The alien's slitted eyes blinked sideways, and its mouth opened in a rasping, mechanical cadence translated into English through Earth's struggling autolinguist. "You denied vassalage. You ignored tribute. Your species will kneel. In 2 full planetary rotations, surrender. Or, we will sculpt obedience from your ash." No threats, no emotion, just fact. The transmission snapped off. The lights returned, and no one spoke. Kors exhaled through his nose, the cold air condensing briefly against his visor before the system adjusted temperature. "That was a lesson plan," he muttered. "They want the galaxy watching when we fold." Captain Rorik stepped forward. "Sir, orbital defense? Global Assembly has greenlit counter-deployment. Stand them down." A pause. "You want to keep our fleet grounded?" "I want to keep them breathing," Kors snapped. "Their disruptors don't punch hulls. They scramble everything. If we launch now, we hand them a clean test of their weapons." Behind him, a secondary screen flared red. Incoming data bursts showed a collapse in signal synchronization across multiple continents. Every screen shuddered with corrupted maps, misaligned GPS, fragmented orbital footage. Fusion lines fell dark, one by one. "They're not aiming at our soldiers," Kors continued, stepping forward and wiping his gloved finger across the interface, revealing a barely functional atmospheric scan. "They're aiming at coordination, at the spine of civilization." He turned to his comms officer. "Bring up the Krath disruptor scan from the I/O array." A grainy schematic hovered in green over the table's laser display. Kors leaned in, studying the pulse pattern. "Notice this," he said, zooming into a section of the Krath fleet grid. "Every wave peaks at identical intervals. 15 seconds. Exact synchronicity. That's not artificial." "You think it's biological?" Lurik asked. "I think it's worse than that. Their fleet's running off a synchronized nervous system. Every ship, an extension of a single organism's rhythm, and like any body," Kors tapped the nearest icon hard. "Interrupt the heart. You drop the whole damn thing." A moment of silence. Kors looked up. "We're not going to punch through that with missiles or mass drivers. We need to scramble it." The room stiffened. No one asked what that meant. He moved to the adjacent console where a sealed set of data files required 3-level encryption. Authorization, Kors Dren. Protocol Stiletto. Access granted. The screen decrypted. A 3D model spun slowly into view. Project Stiletto, a swarm of low-orbit satellite units, camouflaged as atmospheric monitors, designed to emit high-frequency pulse disruptors across multiple neural-based signal arrays. The project had been buried 3 years ago under treaty violations and fear of triggering preemptive galactic responses. Stiletto's weather probes were launched 6 months ago, Kurz said, hidden under civilian telemetry. They're already in orbit. We just never told anyone what they could actually do. One of the technicians blinked. They were? Launched already? Kurz nodded. I had them piggybacked onto climate monitor rockets. 2 per launch. Each one looks like it's tracking weather, but they've been listening to biosignals the entire time. Sir, Rorik asked carefully, what happens when we activate them? Kurz didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the window. The Arctic sky beyond was gray, thick with snowfall. But faintly, too faint for ordinary sensors, he could see the Kroth vessels moving above the cloud cover. Gliding. Watch. Davy came to teach us something, Kurz said, not turning back. Let's make sure they forget how to breathe before they finish the first sentence. He faced the comms desk again. Order full blackout on Earth's defense grid. All fleet assets remain in hardened silos. Send no transmissions, no signals, just stillness. But they'll think we've surrendered. Exactly. He paused one final time, then pointed at the activation command pulsing green on the screen. Light the satellites. Phase 1 begins now. His hand dropped. Somewhere above, in Earth's thin blue arc, dozens of orbital weather stations blinked once, their internal cores shifting from climate mode to directed pulse alignment. And below, across the crippled cities of Earth, the silence wasn't despair. It was the inhale before a lesson, taught in a language the Kroth had never bothered to translate. The launch order came through without preamble. No speeches, no dramatics, just one name, Thal. Captain Voren Thal stepped into the deployment bay of the Drake Fold, where 10 interceptor pilots stood in cold silence. Around them, the chamber hissed with retracting clamps as the reinforced hull exposed its inner launch rails. Thin, black tunnels pointed at the upper thermosphere, already tuned for burst trajectories. His boots struck the grated floor as he walked forward, the frost crackling beneath each step. He stopped in front of his squad, meeting every set of eyes, one by one. No nods, no gestures. They didn't need reassurance. Strip every assumption you brought in here, Thal said. This isn't a border patrol. You're stepping into something that thinks together, breathes as a whole. If we disturb that rhythm, they'll respond like an injured body. They won't chase us. They'll convulse around us. The lights dimmed. A wall projection blinked to life, showing Earth from above. Its orbit wrapped in a spiderweb of Krath warforms, drifting in a lattice pattern. The alien vessels weren't static. They pulsed, adjusted, stretched in coordinated shifts like tendons flexing. A damaged one twitched awkwardly in Quadrant 7, like a pulled muscle in a trained arm. Thal turned back. We're not scouts, we're surgeons. One wrong incision and the whole body wakes. The bay locked into silence. Then came the checklist. Oxygen seal, neural mapping dampeners, black shell injection. Each interceptor suit received a coating of particle scatter mesh, repurposed from abandoned Comet harvester gear. Originally meant to cloak deep core heat signatures during ice mining near Saturn's edge, it had never seen use in combat. Tonight, it would cover Earth's only eyes in orbit. The interceptor vessels, themselves sleek needles with no weapon mounts, were designed to disappear. No trails, no radiation bleeds. They launched silently, their exhaust cooled through reverse thermodynamics and dispersed by static baffles. As each one shot up the rail and pierced the ionosphere, it vanished from all human instruments. Exactly as planned. From the command seat of Vesper 1, Thal felt the structural frame quiver as the upper layers of atmosphere sheared past. Outside, the planet shrank behind him, while the Krath swarm filled his forward view. His fingers, wrapped in insulated gloves, tapped a command sequence into the side panel. The craft slowed to orbital drift. No lights, no signals, even breathing became a conscious effort. One by one, the other 9 crafts slotted into orbit around him, hiding inside the Krath formation's blind spots. Thermal dead zones where the larger bioship's shielding created natural interference. These were known gaps in traditional energy fleets. But what stood before them wasn't traditional. The Krath vessel stretched and rippled with movements too fluid to be mechanical. Some coiled around others, some sprouted protrusions that pulsed briefly then retracted. From this distance, they resembled living statues, not machines, but growths. Each one appeared to have a central core that throbbed faintly in rhythm with those nearby. Thal magnified Quadrant 7. One of the Krath cruisers, partially ruptured near its rear section, had begun adjusting its orientation irregularly. It twitched more than glided, and the connective pulses to neighboring ships flickered. Thal opened the encrypted line, speaking into the microcom with surgical coldness. Vesper Group, target is grid node 7-4, you see the delay? Vesper 3 responded, tone flat. Lag variance confirmed. 13 milliseconds wider than previous pulse spread. Fracture in coordination? More than that, it's trying to recalibrate. Alone. Vesper 6 added. That breaks their hive loop, opens a relay vulnerability. Thal's jaw tensed. Then, that's where we cut. He keyed in the mapping interface. 10 streams of localized data began compiling. Pulse rhythms, energy distribution, deviation vectors. Thal's interceptor fed it all into onboard storage. No outward signals, no active comms. Suddenly, Vesper 8 transmitted an alert code. No words, just a flash. Proximity disturbance. Thal checked the readout. One of the larger Krath carriers, over a kilometer long, had shifted its orientation. Its frontal membrane peeled open. Dozens of dark shapes emerged from within. Drifting, sluggish, jellyfish-like sentries. Vesper 8, drop 5 clicks. Thal whispered into the channel. Latch under that carrier's shadow. They're blind to sublayer drift below 800 meters. As the shape descended, Thal caught his first direct view of one of the Krath rituals. A pair of smaller vessels docked nose to nose, their hulls fused at contact. Bioluminescent streaks ran between them like veins, forming in real time. Something exchanged, a fluid, perhaps, or signal matter. The event lasted only seconds, but the entire grid paused for it. A ritual. Not for combat. For memory. Thal didn't speak, he recorded. Whatever their technology was, it had been grown, not engineered. They weren't here as a conquering army. They were behaving like an immune system arriving at an infection site. Earth wasn't their war, it was their inflammation. And inflammation had to be corrected. His interceptor buzzed softly. Vesper 1 had finished its triangulation. The frequency pulses were now mapped over time, and with the damaged node and 7-4 lagging behind, Earth finally had a key. Thal opened a local file, named it ThreadCut, and encoded it with full field maps. He tagged it for direct burst transmission the moment they cleared the grid. ThreadCut complete, he spoke aloud, even though no one could hear. Then, just beneath him, the Krath-damaged ship pulsed again. Sharper this time. A sudden jolt rocked Vesper 1. A sensor filament had brushed against the interceptor's hull. The ship itself didn't react, but 3 nearby Krath cruisers subtly adjusted orientation. Not fully, not in alarm, but the shift was enough. They'd felt something. Not seen it, felt it. Al clutched the side of his cockpit as the black shell coating began adjusting temperature to blend again. His heart pounded. Not in fear, but in calculation. The timing had to be perfect. He whispered a phrase only his crew would understand. Stay inside the breath, don't let it exhale. He keyed the retreat code. 10 interceptors peeled off their orbital lines one by one, sliding under blind curves, ducking behind shifting warforms. In total silence, like drifting particles of forgotten debris, they began to fall back. Thal stared at the damaged Krath ship one last time. Its pulse slowed. Then, skip. That was the flaw. They weren't designed to be interrupted. They were designed to never need repair. As Vesper 1 broke atmospheric drag again, Thal keyed in the final encryption for Earth Command. His face remained blank, but his words cut through the void like a surgeon's blade. Target mapped, signal deviation isolated, they won't feel the cut until their spine's already gone. Commander Dren Kor stood at the center of Earth's backup command array, staring down a map that no longer represented the truth. The Krath weren't watching the world. They were dissecting it. Their orbital pattern had shifted subtly, leaning more weight over the Pacific Rim. That was confirmation enough. The bait had landed. The moment Thal's interceptors transmitted the final signal packet, Kors had authorized what the world would never know was a performance, a full-spectrum mobilization at 3 coastal bases, all of them hollow. He leaned over the shoulder of Lieutenant Bran, who was typing the final loop into an obsolete encryption stream from the pre-Solnet era, the kind of code that hadn't seen use in over 40 years, noisy by modern standards, but still believable enough to simulate panicked fleet chatter. "Give them old stress traffic," Kors ordered. "Intermittent bursts, not polished. Make it look rushed." Rand didn't glance up. "Leak duration?" 38 minutes. Let them believe the fleet's scrambling. Pacific decoy bases, Cody Station, Point, Irelis, and Eros Deep, had been constructed decades ago as early deterrent bunkers. Their docks were functional, their rail lifts intact, but they hadn't hosted a real vessel in years. Kors had them flood the upper decks with simulated launch signatures, warm air pulses, surface water vapor plumes, and reverse scrambled thrust telemetry, all generated by grounded relay nodes. By the time Krath's sensors locked in, the activity would register as imminent liftoff. "At Bloom's activated," Brand confirmed. "They'll think 20 ships are going airborne." Kors didn't nod. He moved to the second panel and issued a silent command: deploy 3 additional civilian launches. Small cylindrical payloads labeled as meteorology hardware, each carrying one of the final Stiletto satellites. The Atlantic ground team reported confirmation seconds later. The units lifted with civilian-grade propulsion, slow but steady, entirely within range of commercial trajectory paths. Kors walked past a console technician coughing into his sleeve. The air had grown heavier, not from pressure loss, but from lack of movement. Even machines weren't sure what to do in a world gripped by artificial paralysis. He paused by the main field monitor. The Krath vessels, seen through layered drone imaging, had reoriented. Their central cluster now drifted over the Pacific Band, locking into an elevated arc above Point Irelis. Every warship glided with a pulse that still refused to look mechanical. Their forms curved, as if pulled by silent currents. "They're biting," Bran muttered. "They're sniffing," Kors corrected. Across the room, General Tormek entered, his coat speckled with frost. He wasted no time. "We need a public counterstrike," Tormek said, voice sharp. "The Security Council is losing ground. 17 cities are in total blackout. Civilians think we've surrendered." Kors turned, his jaw tensed. "That's because they're watching something fall apart that was never designed to survive independent thought." Tormek stepped closer. "You're saying we just let this continue? No statement? No display of force?" Kors didn't blink. "We let them think we're crumbling." Tormek froze. "You mean, you want them to see panic?" "I want them to catalog failure," Kors replied. "Every signal we send must smell like defeat. If they believe we're falling apart, they'll shift into full analysis mode. They'll spread wider to monitor. That gives us openings." Rand chimed in. "Orbitals are moving. The Krath fleet just deployed 4 long-range sensors above the Mariana Chain." "Then we're halfway there," Kors said. The ground shook again. Barely, but enough to rattle the light fixtures overhead. Not an attack. Not an impact. A wave from another neural disruption sweep, brushing Earth's crust, interfering with tectonic monitoring networks. Lieutenant Nerrell, the youngest on shift, flinched as his screen lit red. "Fusion Control reports urban core failures in Lagos and Shenzhen. Hospitals down, traffic command neutralized." Kors didn't move. He studied the screen, the blinking outage points. "Uploads Stiletto's firing matrix." Rand hesitated. "Won't that expose the relays?" "They're passive until triggered," Kors replied. "Right now they're just listening. The real strike is in the algorithm." The firing matrix held each Krath pulse pattern, updated in real time from Thal's interceptors. Cores had structured it to fire in staggered waves, mimicking random cosmic interference to disguise the source. As the matrix uploaded, the orbital channel grew quiet. Then a new alert. Civilian craft launching from Site Delta 3. Public Weather Program, registered under UN Earth Atmospheric Archive. They'll scan it, Bran muttered. They'll dismiss it, Cores answered. Humans always watch the biggest spark. Aliens think even louder. He walked to the edge of the operations deck, where a technician handed him a hardline comm for the internal military feed. Cores opened it to the Continental commanders waiting underground, each facing their own populations, begging for reassurance. He said only this. Keep your silos sealed, lock every hatch. The minute we lift anything for real, we lose the illusion. Let their sensors see panic, but let our machines stay still. Cut. The line went dead. Tormek watched him. You're betting everything on a bluff. Core's eyes flicked to the ceiling. This isn't poker. This is misdirection, and if we get the timing right, they'll never even know where the knife came from. Down below the Arctic ice, 6 more stiletto satellites powered into passive rotation. From space, they looked like broken shells of defunct telecom beacons. Each one calibrated its internal array without emitting a single detectable signal. The software was designed for stuttered startup, mimicking component failure before activation. It would only take one command to bring them online. Bran raised his voice again. New Krath movement. 4 destroyers heading to stratospheric orbit over Panama. Signal leaks must have convinced them, Neril added. Cores exhaled. Not in relief, in confirmation. Then it's working. The world still reeled below. City lights flickered like dying embers. Trains stopped mid-track. Aircraft diverted by blind towers looped over darkened terrain looking for manual beacons. Power nodes burst in waves. Emergency sirens failed in some regions and looped endlessly in others. But none of it mattered. Because as the chaos bloomed, Cores had convinced the invaders of the one thing no army had ever tried to prove through silence. That Earth was already lost. And that made Earth safe. For now. Vorenthal wiped condensation from the inside of his visor, his gloved knuckles brushing against the frost-linned edge of the canopy. His breath slowed to a measured rhythm, carefully matched to the timing protocol blinking green on his auxiliary display. Vesper 1 hovered 30 kilometers above the central Krath node. Below him, the alien formation pulsed like a spinal column caught in perpetual reflex. The final phase required contact, not observation, not mapping, direct relay insertion from inside the swarm. He didn't ask for volunteers. He didn't need to. His own craft had the lowest signature flux. That meant he'd go. He brought up the signal mapping interface. The spread was nearly complete. Hundreds of waveform notches layered in fractal arcs, each tied to a different Kroth vessel's emission trail. Thal had spent 12 hours stitching them together into a matrix of rhythm, not structure. What the Krath used wasn't traditional transmission. They didn't talk across distances. They synchronized. Like a choir with no leader, no conductor, only memory. He ran one final test. The pattern locked. Thal opened a closed loop to Earth's Arctic uplink. This is Vesper 1, frequency constellation complete, preparing final injection relay. From a cargo pod beneath the interceptor, a compressed spike antenna unfolded, designed specifically to fold data into brief signal flickers, mimicking atmospheric interference. The Kroth had proven vulnerable to these, assuming them to be background radiation. He aimed for the central lattice and fired. The relay burst flew invisibly, latching onto an empty zone between 2 of the Krath's larger carriers. It embedded into the surrounding distortion and unpacked itself like a bloom, firing the full matrix back toward Earth. It lasted under half a second. From Earth's stratosphere, stiletto satellites received the injection. In the command bunker beneath Arctic ice, Cores stood before the uplink column, watching each orbital relay light up one by one, their silent confirmation signals arriving in sequence. Matrix received, Bran called out. Cores didn't respond. He'd already moved to the firing console. His hand hovered over the initiation plate, the glass shield under a retractable hood, deliberately analog. The satellites weren't designed to accept software-based orders once active. They required direct physical authorization. The system was paranoid by design. He keyed in the stagger timing manually. "Synchronized to relay lag," he said. "If we hit them all at once, the feedback loops will mask the origin." Lieutenant Nerol handled the countdown. 6 seconds to pulse wave 1, final relay state. Tormek stepped beside Kors. "What happens first?" Kors didn't look at him. "They lose tempo." 6 seconds passed. The uplink tower vibrated as the first Stiletto satellite initiated its pulse. Not a beam, not a blast. A frequency modulation. Broadband noise layered with artificial biosignal dissonance, tuned to mimic the craft's own synchronization code. But twisted, unstable. Spliced with micro-serrers that grew as they echoed. In orbit, the craft formation rippled. 2 ships broke cadence. Their movement lagged. A nearby vessel overcorrected, tilting upward too sharply. Its tethered scout drones drifted in confusion. Inside Vesper 1, Thal watched it all unfold in real time. The entire Krath wall wavered. Only slightly, but enough. Their pulses overlapped, failed to align. Energy tendrils, meant to harmonize with neighbors, suddenly phased at different intervals. A carrier spun off trajectory, correcting violently with a lateral burst that dislodged several of its linked sensory arms. One of its support frigates, unable to receive new orientation data in time, clipped its side. The collision cracked part of its dorsal structure and knocked it into a downward spiral. The Krath didn't scream. They didn't signal alarm. But their entire formation started shifting, jittering in waves of compensation. Thal clicked the internal recorder. They don't know what broke. They just know something did. Earth's relays initiated the next pulse. This time, a cluster of vessels near the western equator node fired into empty space. False contacts. Their targeting systems had misread the noise in their feedback loops as enemy positions. From the surface, long-range surveillance drones picked up the detonation flashes. Blue arcs bursting mid-air far above the ocean. No impact trails. No trajectory correlation. Just self-inflicted strikes. Back in the bunker, Brand checked the real-time feed. 37 ships out of sync. 9 misfires, 1 confirmed collision. Kors crossed his arms. "Begin ghost frequency overlay." Rand hesitated. "They're already destabilizing. You want to escalate? They haven't fractured yet. The signal needs to feel real. Something they'd never think we built." Ghost frequency, an artificial Krath command pattern stitched from Thal's mapping data, broadcast by Earth's satellites in randomized locations, masquerading as authority pulses. The satellites initiated the ghost wave. Instantly, the formation above shifted again. A destroyer banked hard toward the wrong node. Another followed. A gunship looped its weapons outward, targeting a ship still in drift mode. The volley struck, tearing through its outer membrane. The damaged vessel split lengthwise and slowly ejected its inner structure into the atmosphere, bleeding heat signatures and organic residue. Earl turned pale. "They're cannibalizing each other." Kors stepped forward. "Not cannibalizing. Responding to false hierarchy. Their collective doesn't know who to trust." The northern display lit with a cascading pattern of signal flickers, each one marking a deviation, a stutter, a breach in rhythm. Then it happened. The Krath cruiser, thrown off by 4 sequential command misfires, broke lateral orbit and slammed into a nearby gunship. The impact sent both careening into a third vessel's rear stabilizers. The cluster spun out together, discharging random pulses into the grid, which triggered further scatter from 2 adjoining flanks. Thale saw it first. "They're unraveling," he whispered. From orbit, the formation no longer resembled a fleet. It looked like something collapsing inward. Not because of external force, but because the very idea of its structure had been poisoned. He keyed the encrypted final confirmation back to Earth. Thread cut complete. Signal field compromised. They're reacting as if we altered their memory. Bran read it aloud in the bunker. Everyone looked to Kors. Kors raised his head slowly. Deborah made us listen to silence, he said. Now we let them hear themselves fall apart. The ice beneath Antarctic base Severin groaned under the slow opening of silo bay doors. Pressure valves hissed through frozen vapor as retractable clamps disengaged from reinforced cradles buried 80 meters below the crust. Towering silhouettes emerged. Sleek, angular hulls stripped of ornament, painted in thermal reduction matte to vanish against the cold sky. This wasn't a launch born of desperation. It was a release years in the making. Commander Dren Kor stood inside the central launch bay, hands clasped behind his back as sub-commanders issued clearance codes. Each ship had been fueled days before the Krath arrived. Their flight algorithms were embedded with trajectory brakes and glide corrections to mimic instability, an invitation for enemy targeting systems to misread. 50 vessels, Earth's full orbital strike fleet, began ascending in programmed intervals, 25 from the southern launch bank, 25 from Atlantic Site Grelin, surfacing from oceanic vaults beneath the mid-equatorial trench. No comms, no beacons, no acknowledgement. Each unit climbed with cold burn drives, releasing compressed gas rather than heat. From a Krath vantage, they resembled irregular fragments pushing off debris fields. "Shadow curtain holding," reported Lieutenant Neril through the internal band. "Drive staggered, trajectories cleaned." At the edge of Arctic Command, Kors monitored the upper telemetry wall. He didn't flinch as the Krath began reacting. Their grid flickered. Detachment clusters reformed, ships banked west, and heat spikes registered above Earth's coastal perimeters. They were trying to match angles. They couldn't tell if what they saw were warships or garbage. "Deploy the mimics," Kors said. Sub-Commander Yarrick keyed the drone matrix. From behind Earth's moon, 24 decoy units released. Designed to reflect Earth fleet signatures without carrying weapons or heat cores, they spun like dying satellites. Visually chaotic, magnetically alive. The Krath split. A third of their remaining vassals turned toward the mimic cloud. Another swarm dipped below orbit to trail the false launches over the Atlantic. In a low-orbit shadow pocket, hidden under polarized field disruption, the real fleet coasted silently, unseen beneath the manipulated Krath angles. Captain Thal, now aboard Interceptor Command Node Morrow, watched from inside the carrier's forward alcove. Every console reflected data as motion scatter instead of coordinates. His engineers had disabled direct telemetry for security, using human memory and frame-based AI guidance to fly without signal emission. He opened a one-way relay to Kors. "We're under their feet, and they're chasing ghosts." Kors responded instantly. "They'll see shadows and aim for them, and in that breath, we end them." Thal checked his starboard panel. Railgun capacitors were charging on 12 ships, 16 others prepared for volley dispersion. The last of the warships carried the antimatter silos, embedded in armor-locked housing that required dual commander authorization to unlock. Behind him, Ensign Harvin adjusted the timing grid. Operation Echo Divide, locked. Kors began the countdown from Arctic ground. Echo grid, synchronize on decoy wave. A central beacon lit on the fleet's deep spectrum overlay. An invisible wave meant only for internal recognition. It ran like a tide through the silent corridors of each ship. On the Atlantic side, deep-sea command nodes released ballast panels. Buoyancy towers tilted upward. Submerged launch elevators burst to life, carrying the remaining 25 ships skyward with slow, methodical thrust. Kors turned to Tormak. "There's your counterstrike. Not with broadcast, not with banners, just formation." Tormak stared at the climbing ships, some already clearing the lower thermosphere. "You expect them to stay confused?" "No," Kors said. "I expect them to follow pattern logic. And that's how we guide their mistake." Krath formations in upper orbit showed signs of internal recalibration. With their synchronization broken and false signals flooding their decision lattice, they no longer moved with their original elegance. Some ships drifted too far from their cores. Others froze, waiting for new instructions that would never arrive. Inside the Morrow, Thal watched two Krath destroyers fire into a decoy cloud. The blast shredded the dummy drones, sending brilliant shrapnel trails spiraling into orbital drag. "That's one squad down," said Harvin, grinning without humor. 43 more think they're hitting something." "Good," Thal replied. "Let them win every round, that doesn't matter." The first real ship aligned its cannon. Railguns charged quietly. Mass-loaded with tungsten rods cooled to ambient and housed in impact-muffled chambers. They would fire without warning, but not without purpose. Back underground, cores adjusted the firing arc manually, using an analog rotational stick. "Adjust vector targeting on the command ship. We strike their anchor formation first." Bran ran his thumb across the targeting display. "Visual lock in 4 seconds. Final data from drone loop confirms their core is still rotating on predictable cadence." Neural interrupted, headset twitching. "Sir, their rear fleet just pinged our cloud and turned back. We have maybe 2 minutes before the mass collapses." Cores gave no reply. His hand dropped to the trigger key. "Then let them run back into the fire." From orbit, the first railgun discharged. The ironclad rotated into combat orientation, its internal ballast shifting to absorb recoil before the first volley left the chamber. Inside the command deck, ambient lights dimmed as capacitors rerouted their charge. Cold steel vibrated beneath the crew's boots, not from power surge, but from the compression of every stored kinetic round waiting to be fired. Commander Kor stepped up to the forward alignment rail. His voice didn't rise. "Target command node Alpha 3, set timing to double stagger, lead velocity reduced by 4%. I want it to look like a misfire before the second round strikes." Across the orbital sky, Earth's fleet tightened into triad groupings. Every ship formed lockstep formations, arcs mapped down to the kilometer, gliding in silence through planetary drift. Craft vessels ahead shifted in chaos, still chasing decoy trails. They hadn't seen the ironclad yet, not as a threat, until the first railgun fired. A tungsten spike the size of a minibus tore through the upper deck of a Krath corvette. No detonation, just a sickening twist in orbit as the organic vessel cracked, folded, and ejected debris into open drift. A second spike followed, slamming into its rear bank and cleaving the structure clean through. Its outer shell split like wet bark. By the time the Krath nearest to it reacted, 4 more Earth ships had fired. No formation, no signature flare. Every shot felt like an act of subtraction, removing pieces from the sky without noise. Inside the Moreau, Thal tapped his uplink relay. "Targets confirmed. They're still blind. Flank 5 is stuck in a closed response loop." He gestured to his assault teams. "Release the seeds." Nano-disruptor pods launched from 5 interceptors, small, insect-sized machines packed into ceramic spheres that cracked on delivery. As the pods scattered into Krath hull seams, the microfilaments within activated. They didn't destroy. They mimicked, blending into the Krath signal fabric and releasing false proximity triggers. Half a minute later, 3 Krath vessels opened fire at each other. Thal leaned in closer to the monitor. "Their neural net is triggering defense patterns from inside." Earth's rail fleet shifted forward. Antimatter silos disengaged their locks. Captain Harvin stood at the armament console, his gloved fingers flipping ignition triggers one at a time. 30 pods active. Initiating long-range dispersion curve. Missiles lifted off Earth vessels, shaped like arrowheads, housed in radiation-damp shells. Their trails flickered once, then vanished. Antimatter cores stayed sealed until impact proximity. Above, the Krath formation finally realized it was being flanked. Several ships turned too fast. Their coordination hadn't returned. They fired too early, at nothing or at shadows shaped by Earth's ghost frequencies. The ironclad released its second railgun burst, 3 rods stacked in chain deployment, each one locked to a node in the Krath's command signal structure. As they struck, the central cruiser began to list sideways. Its outer membrane pulsed erratically like a convulsing muscle. The movement wasn't controlled, it was reflexive. Two of its escorts panicked, breaking away from formation and firing into the dark. On Earth, inside Arctic Command, Brand read the output. 38 enemy units in combat lockdown. They're striking outside pattern logic, signal bleed confirmed. Cores leaned into the intercom. Feed them a false directive. Have Stiletto relay a looped withdrawal code. Brand triggered the overlay. Half the Croth fleet began pulling back, confused, misaligned. Some attempted formation, others drifted unresponsive, their cores still caught in disrupted feedback. Then, one of the remaining Krath flagships pivoted. It faced the ironclad, its rear propulsion panels overloaded with bioplasma. They weren't angling for escape. They were accelerating. Cores watched the display. They've isolated our command, this one's charging. Tormac's eyes widened. That's a full-speed collision course. Cores didn't blink. Not the first time I've seen fear in reverse. He keyed the firing vector manually. No software input, no system assist. Set recoil brace to dampen echo shock. All forward batteries fire on my mark. Inside the ironclad, the deck lights switched to red. Crewmen locked into magnetic braces. Fire rapport clamps disengaged with the hiss of hydraulic release. Kurz whispered the order. No. 3 railguns fired simultaneously, each loaded with high-density depleted uranium shells wrapped in static brake sleeves. They weren't just built for penetration. They were tuned to vibrate at low resonance on impact. The first hit tore through the Krath ship's frontal membrane. The second ripped a third of its side structure free, exposing its inner layers. Organic tendrils and muscle-like webbing now flailing in vacuum. The third hit its core. The ship ignited from within, but it didn't explode. It folded inward, collapsed by the rupture in its own neural coordination. Its propulsion kicked once more before shorting. Its body tumbled into drift. Onboard sensors flashed green. Target eliminated. Cores turned to the relay team. Broadcast their corpse. Let the rest see what silence did to their spine. Above, the final antimatter pods found their targets. They didn't crackle. They didn't bloom. They shimmered. Blinks of annihilation that carved entire wings from the Krath swarm in seconds. No radiation trails, no debris fields. Just absence. Inside the Morrow, Thal checked the remaining formations. Only 37 Krath vessels remained intact. 27 had no command uplink. He exhaled once through his nose. We didn't just kill their fleet, we murdered the rhythm. 37 Krath warships drifted in silence, their formation broken beyond recognition. Without synchronization, their movements had lost direction. One peeled toward Jupiter's gravity well. 2 others initiated partial hyperspace bursts in opposing vectors. No order, no fallback signal. They scattered like ash thrown into solar wind. On the ironclad, Commander Dren Kors stood before the after-action display. Dozens of Krath blips vanished off radar, not by destruction, but withdrawal. Retreat had begun. It wasn't surrender. It was erosion. They're leaving? General Tormek asked behind him. They're unraveling, Kors corrected. What held them together is gone. The ships that remain don't know who to listen to. From the main viewport, distant arcs blinked, Krath vessels vanishing into fragmented hyperspace jumps. None of them coordinated. Some left trails of ruptured debris in their wake. A pair collided mid-burn, ejecting organic matter and shredded armor into a widening cloud. No one from Earth fired. There was nothing left to target. Only broken instinct drifting into distance. Down below in lower orbit, Earth's recovery teams began deploying sweep drones. Each ship combed through the debris fields, collecting Krath remnants, fragments of their vessels, memory cores, and hardened organic processors. The biological matter twitched under containment, still reacting to temperature and radiation like a wounded animal. Lieutenant Brand stood inside the recovery bay of Morrow 3, examining one of the Krath neural coils suspended in stasis fluid. The texture looked like thick rope, threaded with shimmering veins and nodes that blinked under magnetic response. It's not dead, he muttered. Thal stepped up beside him. It's not alive either. Their systems weren't built to survive isolation. The coil pulsed once, then faded to stillness. Arctic Command relayed global operational status. Orbital sweep confirmed. The last Krath broadcast ceased 21 minutes ago. Earth's satellites had replaced the signal. Instead of flags or victory music, the planet broadcast only coordinates, location markers, radiation alerts, and a neutral code signature. Tormek frowned. That's it? No message? Kors nodded once. This isn't a celebration. We're not the victors. We're the warning. Inside Engineering Sector Theta, reverse integration began. Earth's adaptive AI clusters had been modified to interface with Krath memory structures. The living logic of their ships, once thought to be incompatible, responded to cold translation layers. Lines of code written in Earth's clean syntax now pulsed across Krath cores. Response times improved. Algorithms began solving problems in predictive loops rather than reactionary bursts. It wasn't theft. It was absorption. Lieutenant Nerral reported the first breakthrough. Sir, their computation isn't hierarchical. It's responsive. Every node wants context. Kors watched the first display adapt. Then we feed them context they've never known. Choice. Above the Atlantic node, Thal reviewed orbital drone networks. They'd already begun placing Earth's new monitoring platforms along previous Krath control points. He tapped a screen, cycling through beacon placements. Sub-Commander Harvin stepped beside him. These satellites, you're not arming them? Thal shook his head. No, we're not building weapons. We're building mirrors. The next thing that drifts into our gravity field will see what happened here and rethink every decision before they make it. Harvin nodded slowly. It's strange. No wreckage feels finished. Thal tapped the last beacon into activation. Because this wasn't war. This was collapse. Inside the ironclad, the Council Command relay opened. Every nation leader who had survived the blackout appeared via tight beam nodes. Each face weathered. Each voice carried strain. Kors faced them through the hard-wire channel. We didn't defeat their fleet, he said. We dissolved what held it together. A long pause followed. Then, without formal vote or motion, the Council approved full orbital restructuring. Earth would now possess sovereign control of the near-planetary belt. No foreign entity, diplomatic or otherwise, would pass through Earth's upper atmosphere without clearance verified against the final Krath signal collapse log. Below orbit, military academies began preparing to update core doctrine. For the first time, simulations no longer reflected planetary ground assaults or direct ship-to-ship combat. They were replaced with rhythm analysis, cognitive signal mapping, and misdirection scenarios. Earth would never fight head-on again. In the personnel transfer hall, Vorenthal stood in front of the Eastern Command banner. A strip of fresh insignia had been added to his sleeve. Promotion granted. His new role, Director of Orbital Defense and External Sensor Command. Kors entered without ceremony. Thal offered a brief nod. I assume this means I'm the one who answers next time. Kors' face didn't shift. There's no next time if we keep the sky this quiet. They stood without speaking. Eventually, Thal turned to the outer viewport, watching drones anchor another satellite line. The wreckage fields were mostly cleared. Only a few Krath fragments tumbled in slow orbit, distant, reduced to forgotten shapes against Earth's blue curve. Funny, Thal muttered, how they tried to make us listen. In the end, they were the ones who couldn't hear their own fall. Kors stared straight ahead. Ellie didn't fall, he said. They were never standing. They floated on assumption. Far above the orbital threshold, Earth's last satellite blinked online. It sent no message, no sound, only a rotating code beacon broadcasting one line. Transit denied, system no longer indebted. The galaxy would read it. Not as a threat, not as a claim, as a boundary. And beyond it, Earth would no longer follow. The Krath Dominion did not fall in a single night. It tore itself apart over 22 planetary cycles, system by system, betrayal by betrayal. Without the central neural grid, their command vessels lost the ability to enforce compliance. Colonies that had obeyed for generations began transmitting a different kind of signal: questions, doubts, demands. It started with Euron Spyro, a border mining world that seized tribute. Then came Hask Terra, whose overseers were executed by their own bonded laborers. By the end of the second week, 12 vassal states had declared independence. Not rebellion, disinterest. The Empire hadn't just been defeated, it had become irrelevant. Earth never claimed victory. Instead, the planet sent envoys. Not in warships, not in posturing fleets. In small delegation craft, painted gray, carrying no weapons. And one clear document. A resource-sharing pact, written in neutral terms, built on mutually verifiable exchange. Some former enemies expected deception. None found it. In the council chamber beneath Antarctica, the new planetary alliance convened for the first time. No banners, no anthem. Just a ring of seats, each occupied by someone who had lived through the blackout, through the silence, through the uncertainty of the world ending without fire. Commander Drenkor sat in the upper tier, removed from direct discussion. His name was no longer on the engagement rolls. He wore no insignia. The only mark he carried was age, and the kind earned from watching your species learn what it could become when it stopped trying to be understood. Beside him, Thal reviewed incoming confirmations. 14 systems had accepted Earth's terms, not because they feared a second battle, because they knew there wouldn't be one. Thal leaned back, tired but composed. "What now?" he asked quietly. Kors didn't answer. He watched the central floor, where Earth's new delegates moved with practiced calm. No orders, no threats, no declarations. They asked questions. They listened. They offered nothing they couldn't match. Tormek entered late, his presence now more symbolic than strategic. He offered a nod to Kors, who barely acknowledged it. Everyone expected an empire to rise, Tormek muttered. Something to take the Krath's place. Kors finally spoke. They forgot the difference between a shield and a crown. A technician passed between the rows, carrying a small case marked Archive Clearance. It was placed onto the center platform and unlocked with a manual key. Inside, declassified footage from Thal's interceptor squad, time-stamped and unedited. One clip loaded across the orbital network. The room darkened. On every screen, Krath ships twisted in orbit. No weapons, no fire. Just collapse, slow, synchronized, and final. A visual echo of coordination dying in real time. No one in the chamber spoke. The footage was quiet. Too quiet. A craft command cruiser drifted out of alignment. The footage zoomed as its inner membrane convulsed. It twitched once, twice, then folded inward, vanishing behind its own confused architecture. Another followed, and another. The screen froze on a final frame, 20 Krath ships vanishing in a perfect, eerie rhythm, none reacting to the others. They weren't struck. They weren't damaged. They forgot how to exist together. As the lights returned, the room remained still. One delegate whispered. They didn't even scream. Thal stood, his voice clear but calm. We showed them nothing they hadn't shown us. Misdirection, control, silence. They built an empire on a single rhythm and never imagined it could be rewritten. He looked toward Kors. And we didn't rewrite it, we interrupted it. Across the galaxy, those ripples reached further. The Vicari Concord, long neutral, offered an open trade line. The Trennic, once Krath loyalists, requested observational access to Earth's relay system. Even the Orat cluster, famed for isolation, broke protocol to send a single word: listening. Kors declined every invitation to speak publicly. He refused medals. When asked for interviews, he said nothing. When asked what Earth's new doctrine would be, he wrote only this: We fought to exist without instruction. If we become the ones giving it, we've failed. In the following month, Thal was named head of Earth's orbital stabilization network, overseeing the integration of all outer node warning systems. He declined a fleet. Instead, he authorized beacon fields, calm, data-rich transmissions that reported gravity shifts, pulse patterns, and trajectory maps. Nothing more, nothing less. The Krath never returned. No probe, no message, no retaliation. It was as if the remnants of their power had dissolved, not into silence, but into irrelevance. Years later, students would watch the declassified footage in defense seminars. They would study the fallback vectors, the disruption patterns, the decay loops of alien command protocols. Teachers wouldn't call it a war. They would call it a reconfiguration. And when they reached the final frame, when the last Krath vessel buckled in perfect sequence and faded from orbit, none of them would speak, because by then every student would understand. What Earth won was not a fight. It was the removal of a lesson forced upon them. Kors watched it once more alone, years after his retirement. Eyes fixed on that moment, the last Krath beacon winked out. He said nothing, no commentary, no reflection. Only one thought passed through his mind as the screen dimmed and the room returned to stillness. They wanted to teach us a lesson. Instead, they became the one thing we'll never need to warn about again. Thanks for joining us on this journey through Earth's quietest and most devastating victory. If this story left you thinking about power, misdirection, and the price of being underestimated, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who still believes humanity plays by the rules. What would you have done if you were in Kors' place? Strike louder or let silence do the cutting? Drop your answer in the comments.